It's not every lawyer who can say they've changed the deeply embedded pattern of discrimination on Wall Street, but the law firm of Moody Warner won that right for 2,700 women and won it big against the investment giant Morgan Stanley. Everybody knows that sexism exists on Wall Street. Everybody knows that women on Wall Street had to be better and work harder than their male counterparts to get ahead. Everybody knows that very few women hold positions of real power or earn top dollars on Wall Street. And everybody knows that the old boys club atmosphere persists on Wall Street. Complaining about gender discrimination against your employer can be the kiss of death for your job and your career. The issue of women's rights, not in the sense of special kinds of human rights reserved for women, but in the sense of the equal enjoyment by women of their general human rights, remains an important one. The Universal Declaration and the Human Rights Treaties forbid discrimination on the grounds of gender. Article 2 states that everyone is entitled to all rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration without distinction of any kind. Article 7 states that all are equal before the law and are entitled without any discrimination to equal protection of the law. All are entitled to equal protection against any discrimination in violation of this declaration and against any incitement to such discrimination. This means that the anti-discrimination rule goes beyond discrimination in the application of human rights. If everyone is entitled to equal protection by the law, then it means there can be no law which discriminates. Every law which offers unequal protection to men and women is a violation of the Universal Declaration, whether or not this law seeks to protect human rights. More progress has been made for women, but most women continue to work in jobs stereotyped as female jobs. And women in nearly all job categories receive less pay than males in those same job categories. Women face limits on promotion to high-level management positions because of conscious and subconscious sex bias, and continue to experience sexual harassment on the job despite increased employer awareness of an employer's responsibility and obligation to take preventive and corrective action. Today, the Insider Exclusive goes behind the headlines to show you how Chris Moody and Whitney Warner, partners at the law firm of Moody Warner, helped Wall Street women win $70 million against Morgan Stanley in this landmark settlement to safeguard and promote the rights of women on Wall Street, and how this settlement sends a message to other Wall Street firms that discrimination will not be tolerated. Achieving this goal is necessary if the American workplace is to reflect American values of fairness and equal opportunity. Hi, I'm Steve Murphy, and this is the Insider Exclusive, live from Albuquerque, New Mexico, at the law firm of Moody and Warner. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Chris Moody and Whitney Warner to the show. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You are primarily a law firm that specializes in employment law, right?
That's correct.
But tell us, you also represent employers sometimes as well as employees. Tell us a little bit about your practice.
Well, we started off representing employers. Historically, that's what we did. But we got more and more interested in representing employees as we went along. Not only because it's an interesting practice and hopefully you can do some good, but you can bring some interesting cases and make some interesting law. So we're doing more and more of that.
Now, this case that we're going to talk about today, the Morgan Stanley case, it was ultimately approximately a $70 million settlement. It took 2 years. Tell our audience a little bit about, it involved a lot of people, 2,700 women. Tell our audience what happened, what was going on at Morgan Stanley that this whole case developed in the first place?
Well, I think what was going on at Morgan Stanley was what was going on at a lot of other companies like that. It had always been a man's world, and it remained a man's world. It's all about money in that business, and the men traditionally had the clients and therefore made the money, and were resistant to changing the way they operated.
I understand that when new leads would come in, this was one of the issues involved, that they would be distributed amongst the men, the males, rather than the women, correct?
Yes, there were some ways that they had of going about doing that. They had sort of a fat get fatter and the thin get thinner method of distributing accounts. So the person who had the most assets under management, for example, would get the largest account of set of account distributions. And then the next largest producer would get the next largest account, and so on. And so it really just perpetuated a history of discrimination because the women were never in a position to get the biggest accounts.
Right.
So they'd get the smallest accounts or the ones that were more trouble than they were worth to manage and end up having to spend a lot of time on a small valued account.
Now, we're here in Albuquerque, which is not one of the major metropolitan centers of the United States, and yet you were involved in a major case that happened in Wall Street. How did you guys get involved with this case?
Well, we started off by representing one financial advisor in Santa Fe.
And what did this financial advisor, when she came to you, she said exactly what?
She said that she had worked for Morgan Stanley and that she had been discriminated against and retaliated against there. So we investigated it and resolved her case.
When she says she had been discriminated against, she was not getting what? What was she not?
Well,
how was she not being treated?
Just like the people we later ended up representing, she was not getting accounts. She was being cut out of new accounts that came in, or when a broker left and accounts were distributed, she was not getting those.
And she would go to her manager, right? She obviously went to her manager.
Sure.
What was her manager's response?
This is the way we do it, and we're not changing it.
You settled that case, correct?
Yes.
With a local office of Morgan Stanley, or what?
Yes.
Okay. And as a result of that, other women started coming to you, correct?
Right.
And they had similar complaints?
Very similar.
Similar issues.
In fact, we were struck by how similar they all were. And since everyone we were talking to, and we started really in Colorado. We ended up talking with a bunch of people in Colorado, and then it kind of spread from there. But what struck us was everybody we were talking to pretty much had the same complaints. And that means you're talking a company-wide problem.
Tell us a little bit about how long it took to settle this case and how many people you actually interviewed. I think you interviewed a lot, didn't you?
We did. In the course of going through the case preparation and also the settlement discussions lasted about 2 years. And in that process, we interviewed hundreds, 200 or so, female financial advisors of the company, both current and former employees. And as Chris said, we were struck over and over again by how similar their stories were, whether they were in Michigan or Florida or Connecticut or Colorado. It was the same pattern, the same story over and over.
Why does the settlement talks take so long? What happened during these 2 years?
Well, we were trying to negotiate two things in the settlement. One was a very broad package of systemic or programmatic relief to change the way that the company was doing business. We needed to overcome the historical bias that was woven into their business practices. And secondly, of course, we needed to negotiate the financial remedy and relief for the class members.
You have other cases now against some other financial institutions, and I think a lot of our audience, and especially I, would like to know, when you say you're trying to change things at a company, who do you deal with in these settlement talks? Are you dealing with their general counsel and their outside law firm?
Yes, oftentimes we have general counsel and outside firm. They always have outside counsel. And we'll have usually a high-level person in the business side of things as well, because we're talking about changing their business practices.
So do you have conferences where you sit down and talk with them and say, these are the changes we'd like to see happen?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And what's their immediate response usually? We'll look into it?
Their immediate response
We'll consider it?
Usually their immediate response is, we're not going to do anything plaintiff's counsel wants us to do.
Or we can't
Wait a minute.
do it.
That's what comes out of the general counsel?
They put
or
it,
a high-level business person?
They put it more to the effect of, well, we'll think about what you have to say, but at the end of the day, we don't want outside counsel, especially from your side of the table, telling us how to run our business.
Okay. There were some changes that were implemented, some pretty drastic changes, correct?
That's right.
So how do you get from we're not going to have you tell us how to run our business to making these changes?
That's what takes so long, because it is a long process. They initially say we don't want to do it, or we can't do it, or both. And so it just takes time to work through those issues, to explain how it can be done, and to make some progress at explaining why it should be done. And eventually you have to get some high-level person in the company involved or it's not going to happen.
What is the highest level person that you got involved with Morgan Stanley?
The principal contact there who was involved in all the mediation sessions was a special counsel, the senior counsel for employment matters, who reported directly to the CEO of that company.
So you never talked with the CEO about this,
No.
did you? But you got obviously feedback through him.
Yes.
As a result of this settlement, which I think in cash was like $46 million or something like that, $7 million allocated of their own money. Where did they get that number, by the way, of coming up? We're going to spend $7.5 million of implementing the changes. How do you know the value of that? Because they told you?
Well, I mean, to some extent you have to take that on trust, right?
Okay. And